Chapter 15 Benajeer Bhutto. On December 27, 2007, just 10 days before the scheduled election, Bhutto addressed a crowd of 10,000 at Liaquat Bagh in Rawalpindi, the site of Liaquat Ali Khan's murder in 1951 and very close to the jail where Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had been executed. After leaving the platform, she returned to her armor-plated Toyota Land Cruiser against the advice of her security team and with the same joy in communicating with the crowd that Mary Ellen Mark had noted 20 years previously. She was so that her head and torso appeared through the escape hatch. As she waved at the crowd, there approached a gunman, later identified as Pashtun boy named Bilal alias Saeed, of about 15, who fired 3 shots in the space of a second. After the second, Bhutto fell like a stone, back down through the hatch. Quickly after that, the boy set off a suicide bomb. All this was determined by the later examination of mobile phone images from the event. At the time, it was not clear to witnesses whether Bhutto had been killed by a bullet or a bomb. Even those inside the van, a group that included PPP Vice President Makhdoom Amin Fahim, a senior president member, and PPP political advisor Safdar Abbasi, were shaky on their stories. Bhutto was taken to the Rawalpindi hospital, where doctors tried unsuccessfully to resuscitate her. She was declared dead at 16 p.m. No autopsy was performed, under express instructions from the police. Later, the hospital offered the widower Jardawi the possibility of one, but rather surprisingly, he said it was not necessary. Immediately after the attack, the scene of the assassination was washed down with a high-pressure fire hose. A spokesperson for the Ministry of the Interior reported that Bhutto had died of a head injury sustained on a lever attached to the escape hatch of her vehicle. Whether Bhutto died from a bullet or a head injury is not as important a question as just who Bilal was and who had masterminded his attack. The Ministry of the Interior claimed that a tribal leader from the northwest, one Baitullah Mahsood, had ordered the assassination with support from Al-Qaeda, though Mahsood, through a spokesperson, immediately denied responsibility. Cell phone footage shows Bhutto's chief bodyguard, Khalid Sahin looking at her and running his fingers across his throat. Several months later, he was mysteriously murdered. In general, the Western media was ready to blame Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations for Bhutto's death, while Pakistanis tended to believe it was an inside job run by Musharraf, the army, the ISI, or some coalition thereof. These players had certainly been guilty by omission, even if they had played no active role in the crime. The security they had offered Bhutto had been scandalously inadequate. Musharraf, unhappy at being suspected of ordering Bhutto's death, asked Scotland Yard to investigate the murder. But so many obstacles were put in its way that its final report could only be inconclusive. Later, Syrian diplomat Gerardo Munoz was delegated by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to lead an investigation. He gave the details of killing and its aftermath in his report to the UN, later expanded and published a book, Getting Away with Murder, Benajeer Bhutto's Assassination and the Politics of Pakistan. The quick cleanup, the police refusal to allow the hospital to perform an autopsy, and other indicators made it clear that some sort of cover-up was in play. People in the government and military were visibly nervous about talking to the UN team. Hamid Gul absolutely refused to do so. Cell phone footage seen by the team demonstrated not only that Bhutto had received minimal police protection, but also that the police might well have been actively involved in the deed. Evidence collected was minimal and not of much use. The Land Cruiser had been carefully cleaned and scrubbed by the police while the investigation was still underway. It is my belief that the police deliberately boosted the investigation into Bhutto's assassination. Munoz asserted unsurprisingly, but why and where they alone? Was the ISI involved, as seemed probable to most who speculated on the case. Munoz was convinced that Police Chief Saud Aziz did not act independently in deciding to hose down the crime scene. The only precedents for hosing down a crime scene involved military targets. He does not mention Murtaza's murder. Some police officials saw this as further indication that the military was involved. Many, including the powers that be in Washington, found it convenient to accept the Interior Minister's fingering of Baitullah Masood and that ever-useful, all-purpose enemy, Al-Qaeda. Benajeer's murder, Munoz commented, remind me of the Spanish play Fuente Ovejuna, in which the hated ruler of village Puente Ovejuna is killed and the magistrate who investigates the crime cannot find the culprit. During the investigation, every villager interrogated declares that Fuente Ovejuna did it. In Benajeer's case, it would seem that the village assassinated her. Al-Qaeda gave the order, the Pakistani Taliban executed the attack, possibly backed or at least encouraged by members of the establishment. The Musharraf government facilitated the crime by not providing her with adequate security. Local senior policemen attempted a cover-up. Benajeer's lead security team failed to properly safeguard her, and most Pakistani political actors would rather turn the page than continue investigating who was behind the assassination. Munoz and his team delivered their somewhat inconclusive report in April 2010. In 2012, after Musharraf in exile had been issued a subpoena for his arrest for failing to provide adequate security to Bhutto, and former police chief Aziz had been charged with criminal conspiracy to murder. Interior Minister Rahman Malik presented the final investigation report by Pakistan's Federal Investigation Agency, which named a staggering 27 terrorist groups as having executed the murder. At the end of that year, Pakistan's Dawn newspaper described the judicial investigation with resignation, repeated and unending investigation. Indifferent lawyers, a chaotic judicial system, and a government that really did not care have all ensured that Benazir Bhutto's trial is going nowhere. Bhutto had written up a document she called her political last will and testament for the members of the PPP on October 16, just before her return to Pakistan. Even she, who had courted danger for so many years, must have been aware that this time there was a strong possibility of assassination. In this document, she named as her political heir her son Bilawal, at that time 19 years of age. He was to be the future leader of PPP. Back in 1988, she had denied any dynastic ambitions, responding to 60 Minutes E.D. Bradley, who had asked, "There's been a lot of pain in politics." Even in September 2007, less than 3 months before her death, she had said she was very clear that the children must not think about politics until they finish their education, and they are older and they are mature. In other words, until they know that is what they want rather than because their mother's in it. She claimed that she would have liked Bilawal to go into law or medicine. Now she cemented the reputation of the PPP as the Bhutto family party by declaring her son, whose name would henceforth be Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, the new chairman with his father, Asif Ali Zardari, to act as custodial chairman until Bilawal completed his education. Fatima Bhutto loudly expressed her outrage in the press, and later in her family history. This is the legacy Benazir has left behind for Pakistan. She fulminated. This is the saprophytic culture she created and thrived in. Bloodlines, genetics, a who's who of dynastic politics. This is all her. It is this corrupted and dangerously simple system that allows her husband to rule a country of 180 million people by virtue of having a close enough tie to the dead, to the corpses that demand and receive sympathy votes. For years, by then the inconceivable had actually happened. Asif Ali Zardari, the hated Mr. 10%, had assumed the Bhutto mantle. In February 2008, the long-delayed elections finally took place. Zardari was the lucky beneficiary of a surge of sympathy from those outraged by his wife's murder. Together, the PPP and the PMLN under Nawaz Sharif triumphed easily over Musharraf's parliamentary supporters. Zardari and Sharif, old enemies, now agreed to form a coalition government. With the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, the country officially returned to parliamentary democracy. Zardari, who declined to serve as Prime Minister, appointed Yusuf Raja Gilani to that post and then stood in the wings as the Lawyers' Movement, in a concerted pledge of protest and media appeals, finally brought about the military dictator's downfall, bitterly disappointing those in Washington who had hoped Musharraf would continue to share power with the civilian administration. On August 18, with impeachment talk in the air, Musharraf finally resigned the presidency. 3 weeks later, Zardari, no surprise, was elected to the post. Nawaz Sharif, angry at Zardari's lack of cooperation with his party, withdrew his party from the ruling coalition and repaired to the opposition benches. Zardari would remain in office until 2013, when Nawaz Sharif reassumed power after his party received a large majority in parliamentary elections. Zardari, or the widower's Bhutto, as he is sometimes called, never much loved in his native country, because became increasingly unpopular during his years in power. Corruption, inefficiency, and incompetence marked his presidency. Farooq Reghari, Bhutto's president during her second term, appeared on television, claiming that in 1996, Zardari had insisted that Mir Murtaza Bhutto be rubbed out a few weeks previously. All the policemen accused in Murtaza's assassination had been acquitted in a Karachi session court. Mumtaz Ali Bhutto, who had publicly called Zardari a crook, was arrested. The Pakistani press mocked Zardari's primitive superstition, with Dawn accusing him of having black gods sacrificed at the president's house. Eventually, the ridicule became so loud that Zardari pushed a cybercrime bill through the National Assembly, making spoofing, satirizing, or character assassinating the president a crime punishable by 6 months to 14 years in prison. Bhuttoism is entering a new phase, with Bilawal Bhutto Zardari finally claiming a place in the sun his mother prepared for him. And just what is Bhuttoism anyway? For me, Bilawal says, as serving the people is about poverty alleviation. It remains to be seen how sincere he is in his ambition, or how effective he might be at achieving it. He has so far lived a life, if anything, even more removed from Pakistan's common people than his mother or grandfather did, residing in luxury in London and Dubai during his formative years, and then attending Oxford, where he gained a reputation as quite a party animal. Although Bilawal, at 27, has more than achieved his majority, Zardari remains the co-chairman of the PPP. This dismays many PPP supporters in Pakistan, who urged the son to rid the party of the tarnished ex-president. The Benazir Bhutto of 1988 was a uniting figure for her country. That of 20 years later, a divisive one. In retrospect, here her best and her worst qualities seem so intimately linked that the course of her career might almost have been predicted. Her greatest quality was her valor. I did not believe then, and I do not believe now. Annie Fadiman has said that Banerjee was a perfect politician, but she had courage of a degree I had never seen before and never expect to see again. This is what she still makes Bhutto worthy of our attention, makes her more than just the corrupt, I-compromised politicians her record in office might indicate. As the Pakistani journalist Bina Masar wrote in New York Times op-ed piece on the 7th anniversary of Bhutto's death, Miss Bhutto left behind more than success or scandal. In her wake are the millions of Pakistani girls and women who took at her life, her determination, her perseverance in the face of all odds. They thrilled to the idea, still radical in Pakistan, 40 years after Miss Bhutto began her political career, that gender does not have to stop them from achieving their dreams. The cards might have been stacked in Bhutto's favor. She was rich, educated, aristocratic, the favored daughter of a very powerful father. Nevertheless, her achievement was a remarkable one. Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani schoolgirl and recipient of the 2014 Nobel Peace Prize, who survived being shot in the face in retaliation for her activism on behalf of girls' education, has cited Bhutto as her personal inspiration. But then there is the narcissist, self-serving Bhutto addicted, if not to real power, then to her power over the masses. I wanted to like her. Photographer Mary Allen Mark said, speaking of her days at Bhutto's side during her 1986 triumphal progress, but I did not, a diva. In a way, she was mind-fucker, a little like Marion Brando. Beautiful, powerful, strange, very driven, frightening in a way. If Bhutto had lost her life in 1988, she would be remembered as a shining example of what youth, fortitude, and idealism can accomplish even in the most brutal and repressive political culture. As it is, her career stands as an object lesson in how great charisma and influence can exacerbate what might in an average life remain a latent character flaw and inflate it until it subsumes the entire personality. Bhutto's flaw, inherited from and cultivated by her father, was a belief in the special, almost sacred destiny of herself and the Bhutto family. She might have said with Shakespeare's Richard II, not all the water in the rough road sea can wash the balm but from an anointed king. Bhutto spoke as a democrat, but she, though, and felt as a dynast. And the Pakistani voters who turned out in their millions to vote for the impassioned young woman who promised economic and social reforms and an end to poverty and feudal privilege, but disappointed once again. Thank you very much for listening. This is the end of the page 114 and also end of the book Benazir Bhutto Favored.